Welcome back to another episode of the Miami Herald's Dolphins In-Depth podcast. Today, I actually want to address something that really irritated me on Twitter and social media last weekend. It really got under my craw. It was about the offensive line. And today I'm bringing in Barry Jackson, my Miami Herald colleague, to sort of let me get this off my chest, Barry. I'm not a big believer in analytics. I don't think that this is much of a secret to anybody. I don't think analytics tells the full story. And I've always heard this throughout the season. And I know you like analytics. I know you definitely are a numbers guy and you know the numbers and you believe in Pro Football Focus, which I absolutely do not believe in. But ESPN had a rating of offensive lines. And in their rating, they had the Dolphins ranked the 31st line when it came to, I forgot the fancy mumbo jumbo name, pass protection in terms of how much time you give the quarterback. And Dolphins fans has used that all offseason to justify their claims that this offensive line was trash. Now, mind you, Barry, I think that this was the best offensive line that the Dolphins have had since the Unicorns of 2016. And if you don't know what the Unicorns are, you're just too young. But that was the great year of the Adam Gase era where the offensive line and the J.H.I. running game, they were just the catalyst for a forceful, effective, dominant rushing attack. It was a line that was filled with 4 first-rounders, including Mike Pouncey and Laremy Tunsil playing right guard, and Brandon Albert, and then Juwan James, and then Jermon Bushrod. And when that unit was healthy, they were mowing people down. In a similar scheme, actually, I believe, coached by the man who mentored Mike McDaniel. We'll keep his name out of this, just to protect the innocent, or actually not innocent, but just to protect the embarrassment. But last year's unit, Barry, when healthy, with Connor Williams, with Isaiah Wynn, with a healthy Teron Armstead, you know what game they was a perfect example of what they could do. It was the Denver Broncos game where Miami scored, what was it, 72 points? Or something along that line.
Yeah.
And
second most in the modern day NFL history.
Yes. And they took their foot off the gas, which I wouldn't have done. But I understand Mike McDaniel, the merciful one, being gracious against a coach who basically tried to snake his job, in Sean Payton. I think there's a personal vendetta issue there, Barry, but we'll figure that out the next time these two teams play each other. But this offensive line, they were one of the top units in terms of pass protection. They were one of the top units. I believe they finished 4th in terms of sacks allowed. Finished 2nd I think they were led the NFL in terms of quarterback hits.
Correct.
They were 2nd in rushing yards. Number 1 in yards per carry average rushing. And they did that despite playing the 2nd most offensive line combinations because of the numbers of injuries that they had, whether it be Teron Armstead, Isaiah Wynn, Robert Hunt missed 8 games with his hamstring injury, and Barry, that thing, I've never seen a black man with purple skin. It was really ugly. It was really ugly, and it was the size of grapefruit, and I commend Rob for fighting through that. Austin Jackson was playing with a oblique tear for the second half of the season, only missed 1 game, progressively got worse, but they endured. They made it. Yet, Dolphin fans are in a state of panic because the Dolphins are basically retaining and returning the 31st, in their mind, worst offensive line in NFL history. To that, you say what, Barry?
To that, I would say that this is one of those rare instances where you can look at a group of players and someone could say, yes, that's a good group, and someone could say, no, that's not a good group. And both cases could completely base their arguments on fact. So here are the facts. You've touched on some of these. Dolphins allowed 31 sacks, tied for 4th fewest in the league. They allowed 59 quarterback hits, fewest in the league. 5.1 yards per carry average, Best in the league. So you look at that numbers and you say to yourself, my goodness, this is a really good offensive line. But then there's the argument that's been espoused by Mina Kimes, who's really smart, and others on ESPN and some fans saying this is not a good offensive line. And they give you a couple of statistics. Here are those. You touched on where the Dolphins were 31st. That arcane statistic is pass block win rate. Now, this is an ESPN stat that uses next-gen stats information, Omar.
Computers. That's what they're using. They're using computers.
That's what they're using. And what that stat is based on, just to tell our audiences, the rate that linemen can sustain blocks for 2.5 seconds or longer. Dolphins offensive linemen did that on only 49% of the passing plays for the team last year. That's 31st in football. Now, you could make the case, well, they were releasing earlier because two of quick release allowed plays to get done in fewer than 2.5
No,
seconds.
they actually only count they only begin that measurement at a certain timeline. Like the play has to last longer than this. So it's a even smaller sample size than what they're working against. But, I'll let you carry on.
Yeah. So that would be the case why there's this narrative among national pundits led by Mina Kimes that the Dolphins offensive line is simply not good enough. And in fact, a negative on the team. I would point to a couple of other stats. On running plays of 3rd and 1 or 2 last year, Miami converted 8 of 14. 57% was 25th in the league. If you look at rushing attempts only on 3rd and 1, Miami converted only 5 of 11. That 45.5% was worst in the league. So you could make the argument using advanced metrics that this was not a great offensive line. But if you look at more traditional statistics or simply the eye test, which often is the way to go over statistics, you can say this was a plenty good enough offensive line, and it would have been a great offensive line if Armstead hadn't missed 7 games, if Isaiah Wynn hadn't been lost for the season in the Philadelphia game in October, if Rob Hunt hadn't been lost for an extended period with a groin injury, and if Eichenberg's body had not broken down, which obviously impacted him some as the season progressed.
Don't forget about Connor Williams.
Exactly. Connor Williams losing him in mid-December, although I always found it interesting that in the postseason press conference, when I made the point to Brewer that the Dolphins' offensive line play seemed to decline after Connor Williams' injury, he disputed that, which I found interesting. So I would go with the eye test. I agree with you. The Dolphins' offensive line was good last season. I believe generally in advanced metrics, but in this particular case, I'm not going to let that one statistic, pass block win rate, and 3rd and 1 rushing attempts, of which they had only 11 all season and converted only 5, which wasn't great.
They preferred to throw on 3rd. And
exactly, which you and I and the entire world have questioned. But I'm not going to allow those 2 advanced metric statistics to lead me to the conclusion that the Dolphins' offensive line is not good enough. So that's the first point I would make. Second point I would make is you could, like us, say the Dolphins' offensive line was good enough last year, but also fairly say that they are helped by the fact that Tua has an incredibly quick release.
Yes,
you can also say that they were helped in the running game by the fact that Achane and Mostert have the type of burst and quick hitting the hole ability that helps them as well, that facilitates a good running game. So
they still got to create the hole, Barry.
At the same time,
they still got to create the hole, Barry.
Exactly.
And here's my thing. It's the scheme that creates the hole. People don't realize this, but I've been a huge fan of Mike Shanahan and the scheme that he's built, that he's taken with him everywhere from Denver to Washington to his son has taken with him Atlanta when they were a Super Bowl team. That scheme, and this is Mike McDaniel is a proponent of that scheme. He's a catalyst of that scheme. He is a run game specialist, which is what I loved about him when he was hired here. The scheme makes backs. It creates sustainable success for backs. It's that Alex Gibbs run game scheme concept where everybody works together in unison. And the more they do it and the more familiar they are with it, the better off the unit becomes if they can have some continuity. Now, clearly last year, the Dolphins didn't have some continuity, but what Mike McDaniel's teaching and preaching is that with Butch Barry, a second year with Butch Barry and a second year of everybody being in this scheme, everybody is going to take that next step forward. Now, the argument that you can make countering that is that, okay, but what if they're a substandard NFL starter like Liam Eichenberg? Liam Eichenberg has started, good God, 34 NFL games? And how many of them have been good performances? And I am not anti nor pro Liam Eichenberg. I called him out last year back in training camp when Christian Wilkins was taking his lunch money on a daily basis and bullying him for the first 2 weeks of training camp, to the point where the coaches were like, sorry, Liam, we can't play you as a starter right now. We got to figure out what we're going to do. And yes, he probably had broken ribs. He got shelved probably most of the exhibition season because of those broken ribs. Yes, Christian Wilkins probably broke his ribs. Christian Wilkins abused him. But when when Liam got in there as a center, excluding the Buffalo game where he was a disaster, everybody's first opportunity, I don't care who you lined up in there, if it's their first game playing center in the NFL, I'm pretty sure they're going to struggle. After that, he was respectable. Then Connor came back. He moved to left guard, moved to right guard, and was adequate. At the end of the season, when Connor was out, Liam had to fill in at center again, and he played through a calf injury that a lot of players would not have played through. So, and it was okay. Now, the question is, can Liam take that next year jump, that play like a guy who's got an expiring contract, and do what Austin Jackson did in 2024? And I don't have the answer to that question, Barry.
Well, here's what would give me a little bit of peace of mind with conceding that Eichenberg or Driscoll is likely going to be your right guard. What is the fact that I thought Eichenberg was competent at right guard last season? The trouble came, as you mentioned, at center, especially that October 1st game against Buffalo. That was the only game where I thought he was overwhelmed as an offensive lineman. So 146 right guard snaps for Liam Eichenberg last season, allowed no sacks, just 4 pressures. That's very good. His run blocking was certainly competent enough. So I think we've reached the point with Liam where we can say, at the very least, he'd be a competent. A serviceable right guard starter. And with the salary cap, you can't afford to have great players at every position, obviously. With Driscoll, there has been some experience at right guard, 35 snaps there last year, has played some there in the past for Philadelphia. Last season, he allowed 1 pressure in the 35 right guard pass blocking snaps. He allowed only 1 sack last year at all as a backup for Philadelphia. That came at right tackle, where he played 130 snaps. So I think they are adequate at right guard. My concern would be this, and this is beyond the concern of going from Connor Williams to Aaron Brewer, which we'll talk about in a minute. My concern would be Isaiah Wynn has been injured 4 of the 5 seasons of his career, where he has missed significant time, all with different injuries, including the quadriceps last year. So if you could count on Isaiah Wynn suiting up for 17 games at left guard and give you the type of elite pass protection that we saw from him in weeks 1 through 7 last year, then I would feel better about going into the season with Eichenberg, Driscoll, and Rob Jones as your right guards. But because Wynn historically has been unable to stay healthy, that is what gives me pause for concern, because then if you're playing 2 of the 3 among Eichenberg, Driscoll, and Rob Jones, then you start asking yourselves, is this good enough? Is this something they're going to have to address? So to me, it all comes down to Wynn. If you can count on Wynn for half the season, then I'm fine with Eichenberg and Driscoll competing at right guard and one of them holding it down, shall we say, for the season. But if you lose Isaiah Wynn at some point, and remember, all of these injuries he had in New England and the one last year in Miami have been multi-week injuries, and in last year's case, season-ending with the quad. So if you have to count on Driscoll, Jones, Eichenberg, and say 2 of these 3 will be your guards, then I'm not quite sure it would be good enough for the season. You'd probably get by for a few weeks, but that's where I would have concern. So is your biggest concern, Omar, guard, or is it center, knowing you're going from an elite pass protector in Connor Williams to a subpar one in Aaron Brewer?
The jury is out on Aaron Brewer. I've done a film study on him, and what I would say is he's a potential upgrade from a run blocking standpoint. He's stout, he's strong, he's athletic, he mows people down on the second level, he gets on linebackers at a snap of a finger, which could open up new running options and avenues and opportunities for this backfield. So I could definitely see what they saw in him, why they gave him a $70 million a year contract. My concern is, and what I also like from this standpoint, and people probably will overplay this statement, but Tua's a tiny quarterback. You give him a tiny center, maybe he could see over the line. Maybe. Tua's openly admitted, I can't see over the line. I throw to spots. It is what it is. He's one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the NFL. We knew this when you draft a 6'1" quarterback. Drew Brees is the same way. They're not going to see over 6'4", 330-pound offensive. They're not going to see over a brick wall. So giving him a smaller center, maybe that helps him. But I do think that there are going to be games where you're going to have Aaron Brewer head on head against a zero technique nose tackle, and he's going to struggle. Now, I'll make the argument. The Dolphins put him against Christian Wilkins in the Tennessee game, and he stonewalled Christian the entire game. And we all know Christian is a very good player. So I'm going to hold and reserve judgment, even though he's the smallest offensive lineman I've ever seen in my life, like outside of high school. He is truly very small. I'm going to reserve judgment until I see pads come on. I see them get the green light to actually go mow somebody down, as opposed to, thudding it up and, even what you do in scrimmage. I'll evaluate it then. But I do have some concerns there. Here's the thing. You weren't going to get Connor Williams back because he's not healthy. He's not going to be healthy. And I know Drew, his agent, is saying he's healthy. He's ready for camp. What am I, an idiot? He suffered an ACL injury in December. It's July. You're telling me you see is 7 months out of you're ready for training camp? I know they've done miraculous work, with ACLs. And I heard it last week from a coach. He's like, yeah, 7, we had our guy back in 7 months. And that's impressive. And ACL injuries have come a long way. But are you telling me that I'm ready to put a guy on the field 7 months after an ACL injury? So I'm not. So I have to take Connor Williams out of the equation. But I love the point that you made about Isaiah Wynn and his durability issues, because that leads me. It's really on Rob Hunt and Lester Cotton, and more. Not Rob Hunt, Rob Jones,
right?
Rob Jones and Lester Cotton, and more on Rob, and maybe Chase and Hines. I also want to present to you this possibility, this option, just thinking out the box situation here. The Dolphins drafted Patrick Paul, who is probably the second largest offensive lineman I've ever seen behind Bryant McKinney. There's no way in my mind that he can play guard because he's a massive human being. I don't even think he can stand in a 3-point stance. But you know who could play guard? If in a pinch.
Austin Jackson?
No. He
Kendall Lamb?
No.
Tell me who.
Teron Armstead.
Interesting.
If you think about Teron is athletic. Teron clearly knows how to play the left side. Obviously, it's close quarters. I'm not saying that this is the best alternative, best solution to carrying on the season. Even though your Austin Jackson thing is, I'd consider it in a pinch. He probably wouldn't be comfortable moving. Maybe he'd move to right guard, but not necessarily a complete switch of sides. But Teron Armstead is a 12-year veteran. We've seen left tackles go to left guard all the time. And I'm not saying that this is the right route to take, but if you've got Patrick Paul there and he's shown you that he's ready to go, and he's going to have all of training camp, all of the exhibition season to get greased up and ready to go, because I'm not playing Teron Armstead at all. Not a single snap. Not a joint practice, not a 11-on-11. Teron Armstead can do everything except have contact with another football player on the opposite side. I just don't see the value in it. I've gone the alternative route. I don't see the value in it. Teron will be bubble boy until we get to the regular season. So Patrick Paul's going to get a lot of reps, Barry. I mean, he might get 500 reps by the time he's actually, ready for the regular season.
We can hear a million words uttered by Mike McDaniel and Butch Barry about Patrick Paul's progress for 8 weeks in training camp and early in the regular season. None of it will mean anything. What we'll be telling will be this. When Teron Armstead invariably leaves the game, and goodness, we hope that doesn't happen. He's a hell of a nice person. We're hoping for health for Teron, but historically, obviously, he's never made it through a full season. When Teron Armstead leaves a game, do they install Patrick Paul or do they insert Kendall Lamb? That will tell you everything you need to know about what they think of Patrick Paul at this point. I want to make a couple points on Aaron Brewer. To me, he's the ideal fit from a run blocking standpoint. Pro Football Focus, I know you're not a big fan of their numbers, but somebody's got to do it. They ranked him as the 7th best run blocking center last year. Pass protection is a concern, partly because of size, partly because of his skill set, partly because he doesn't have a ton of experience at center. Maybe Butch Barry can fix that. But last year, just to give our audience what the numbers were, 6 sacks allowed by Brewer, second most among centers. He allowed 34 pressures, which were third most in 622 pass blocking snaps. As perspective, Connor Williams allowed 1 sack, 6 pressures, which are phenomenal numbers, and 280 pass blocking snaps. But I would not at all fault the Dolphins for what they did at center and right guard for this reason. You raised the point about they never could have counted on Connor Williams being healthy, even though Drew Rosenhaus has said now that he is healthy, which wasn't necessarily expected to be the case back in March. Connor Williams was disinterested in signing with any team in free agency in March because he wasn't even sure he was going to play this year. Drew Rosenhaus said repeatedly on WSVN in Miami that he wasn't even thinking about a contract. It wasn't a consideration. So it's not as if the Dolphins chose Aaron Brewer over Connor Williams. They did not have an option to sign Connor Williams in March, and they needed a starting center, and Aaron Brewer was probably the best available. So I understand that. With Rob Hunt, I don't blame them because the money was astronomical at potentially up to $100 million. They certainly couldn't afford that in their cap situation. They did approach his agent last year about an extension, but he was not interested at the number the Dolphins had available. So even though it's painful to lose Connor Williams and Rob Hunt, this is a case where I do not blame the Dolphins at all because I don't see any real path where they could have kept both. With Williams, you certainly just couldn't preempt signing a center for months and wait to see if Connor Williams suddenly woke up one day in July and said, I'm ready to play, which, according to Drew, is the case. One other thing on Connor Williams, or on Aaron Brewer, Omar, that I want to mention. I trust Mike Vrabel, obviously, with his assessment of line play. And the point that Vrabel has made about Brewer is he says he's explosive, he's quick, he's tougher than a $2 steak. He understands the angles and trying to get to guys. He understands pad level technique, and that those are the type of things that he can do that somebody that's bigger than him cannot do. Look at the way he moves. I like the way he shows up to work every day and is willing to compete. And also, they both made the point that when I say they, I mean Mike Vrabel and Brewer's offensive line coach, Keith Carter, last year. They made the point that Brewer transitioned to center on a short week against Green Bay, and that he learned everything and all the play calls. So I have trust that he's going to be, at the very least, a good center. The risk is this. Is there going to be one of those breakdowns in pass protection where we see a behemoth 340-pound nose tackle overwhelm Aaron Brewer, get to Tua, resulting in an injury? That, to me, is the biggest fear with Brewer that was less of a concern, far less of a concern with Connor Williams because he was an elite pass blocker. That's my one worry with Aaron Brewer. Is that a concern you share?
Centers primarily get help all the time. Now, is there a gap blitzer like a Chop Robinson who can come up the gut and force Aaron Brewer into one-on-one positions? If I'm a defensive coordinator, that's clearly what I'm trying to draw up and scheme up. So yes, that is a concern. I think Tua has worked on his mobility for some of these reasons, not because of Aaron Brewer, but Tua wants to be extending plays, move the pocket, and I think it would benefit him and benefit the offense. So let's just hope Tua's wheels have gotten really good, because I do believe that there's going to be pressure coming. Because if I look at the Dolphins' offensive line, you know what the number one approach I'm going to have is? Blitz the A-gap.
Yeah. Oh, no question about it. Right. Because the player you're going against, or the players you're going against, there are questions about.
Absolutely. Questions about, and don't let there be a replacement in there. Oh, And that's the
Exactly.
worst fear. So hopefully it'll be something that they can address. But as I said, consistently all offseason, I would have given Butch Barry my vote if I could have thrown coaches in there for MVP, because I think his unit kept the season alive. He was definitely my coach of the year last season. And so I put my trust and faith in Butch Barry. I know he doesn't have great credentials here from his University of Miami days or what he accomplished in the Denver Broncos before he got fired, before the season ended. But he has proven last season, 2024, that he gets my respect. And those who know me know I've been obsessed with offensive line play for a very long time. And if you deliver the number one rushing attack and then a unit that was what are we going to say? Top 4 in pass protection,
sacks and fewest quarterback pressures permitted.
I'll take that.
That's good. And by the way, for all the advanced, I was going to tell you, Omar, for all the advanced metric heads out there who are saying this is not a good offensive line because of advanced metrics, I got something for you. In the run block win rate last year, another one of these elite offensive line metrics, the Dolphins were 8th best in the league. That's 72% of their running plays. A player won his block. These are designated running plays. According to ESPN Next Gen Stats, there's one advanced metric for you where the Dolphins actually graded out well. So I'm with you. This was a good offensive line last year. It comes down to this. Always going to come down to Teron Armstead's health. Isaiah Wynns to a lesser extent, but it comes down to this. How much of a downgrade are you making from Connor Williams to Brewer? Is it going to be just minimal? How much of a downgrade are you making from Rob Hunt, who was on the cusp of being a Pro Bowl player, to the law firm of Eichenberg, Driscoll, and Rob Jones? To me, it all comes down to that. We should know this, certainly during the Buffalo game in week 2, and we should have a pretty good sense of this by mid-October. So those basically will be the questions to determine, is this a pretty good to very good offensive line again, or is this a subpar offensive line that will result in injuries and hold the team back? That we just can't answer yet.
Yeah. Well, we'll be able to answer plenty more questions as training camp opens on July 24th. Fans, you have the opportunity to go visit training camp and watch the action with your own eyes. You got to go on dolphins.com. This is not an ad for them, but that's where you go get your tickets. You have to get the tickets, even though they'll let you in if you wait a little bit. You do have to go get the tickets, and then the Dolphins are going to have a scrimmage the second week of practice. Woo! At a Hard Rock Stadium. I would definitely get myself a ticket there. Barry, we will be here covering all of training camp for you for the Miami Herald, and we will be doing more than one episode a week because it's season time, Barry, for Dolphins in Depth. We will see you soon.